Welcome to the podcast by Scale My Clinic, founded by Doctors Todd Cameron and Sachin Patel, who are on a mission to help every general practice owner achieve his or her dream. The Scale My Clinic podcast is designed to leave listeners with insights and understanding gained by real lived experience that will help general practice owners create impact, get their time back, and enjoy increased revenue. Join Todd and Sachin every week as they share their stories on the Scale My Clinic podcast.
Well, welcome back to the Scale My Clinic podcast. And today I'm really excited because we've got somebody who you're all going to want to hear from in the current marketplace. Claire Ponsford is founder at Wavelength, recruitment specialist, and you recruit in more areas than just general practice. But recruiting GPs in a drought is something that will be on just about everybody's mind at the moment. So without further ado, I'm going to throw to good friend and business partner, Sachin Patel, just to lead this session out. Thank you, Sachin.
Thanks, Todd. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you, Sachin.
So I suppose what we're told by government and some people who do some types of research are that there are magical trees of doctors, but they only grow in metro areas, these trees. And all we need to do is find a way of these trees that have got lots of doctors on, redistributing them so that they also can go to regional and more remote areas. My anecdotal research, which doesn't match the government and their research, is that isn't quite the case, and there's actually a genuine shortage, and it isn't really maldistribution. I'd love to hear, to start with, what your perspective, having done this for 20 plus years, is, and what you are seeing and experiencing.
And I think that rhetoric really hasn't changed, I don't think, over the last 20 years. It has always been about, well, we don't really have truly a shortage of GPs. It is just that maldistribution side of things. But it's something that we've never really believed or seen in practice. And I think this notion and this policy approach of let's just try and move them from the cities to the bush where they're needed has clearly failed. And it doesn't take into account the fact that most GPs in city areas are pretty busy and they have their lives built in the location that they're currently in, and family and children and schools. And they're not going to suddenly give that all up and move to a rural area. And I know they've put rural incentives in place, but it's not all about money either. You have to consider your family life and your personal life as well as your work life. And as far as I'm aware, and you made this comment previously, Todd, that GPs in cities aren't necessarily sitting on their hands doing nothing. They're all pretty busy. So again, where does this notion come from that there are too many GPs in cities and they're not busy, therefore they should go to the bush and rural areas? It's a problem. I don't quite know what the solution is in changing that view at a government level. It's because it's been so entrenched for so long.
Absolutely. We work with well over 100 practices in Project X, and have contact with many more owners through the Successful General Practice Owner, and there are very, very, very few who are struggling to recruit patients. It's generally a supply side issue of enough clinicians to manage the demand from patients. I mean, that's I'd say 98% of what we see is that. So I think what you're saying and I'm saying matches, and it is quite different to what we're being told is the reasons. And if that reason has been there for the whole time, the 20 plus years that you've been doing what you do, it makes you wonder about where that comes from. And really in the last few years, there's been significant changes that have been implemented that have made it even harder for us to supplement, homegrown talent with clinicians arriving from offshore, and that I think has been intentional and has had significant impacts. Would love to hear, again, your reflections on that and what you've seen and experienced.
You're right, and I think it's something that's not just been peculiar to the general practice space. It's been across all specialties and all colleges in terms of the number of hoops that an overseas doctor has to jump through, to have the privilege of working in Australia, and I think particularly when you consider GPs or specialists that have been through a training system that is very similar to Australia, they ask questions as to why they're not considered to be comparable to the Australian system, where if you took a good look at the way that the training has been structured, you took a good look at the experience that they've got, I think you'd probably be hard pushed to particularly within the general practice space, you'd be hard pushed to find where the gaps are. Yet there are these rules and regulations in place that mean that it's not an automatic recognition of that training or of that qualifications or of that experience. And so there are a lot of GPs that we come across. Well, we'll have that initial conversation because they'll express an interest in coming to Australia. But when you explain to them what the process entails and costs associated with it and the difficulties associated with it, a lot of them will choose not to go through that. And that's even with the assistance of an agency such as ours, where we try to remove a lot of that, the pain of the administration, and we know what we're doing, and it's a much more sort of seamless process. There are still people that will choose not to do it because they see it as too much of a risk, because there are no guarantees that they will actually get through that process and get the full registration and recognition to practice. Plus, even if they do get through it, they don't necessarily get to work where they'd like to work. They have to work in those sort of regional areas first. So I think it really is something that prevents a lot of doctors moving here when they could. And I don't think it's about. Of course, you've got to protect quality. Of course, you've got to ensure that anyone that comes in and practices is of the correct standard. But I think it's probably gone too far the other way in terms of too many rules and regulations in place that impact on flow.
Absolutely. I think when we were talking about this before, when this was first trumpeted as the change coming in, more restrictions for overseas medical graduates. I think it was $400 million savings was the big number that was trumpeted. And so just to be clear, that's $400 million less going towards primary care, general practice, and the high quality work that general practice does. That's all it's doing. It's not doing anything other than preventing large swathes of the population from accessing high quality primary care. So what have you seen as the impact of the pandemic in terms of the way that GPs that you deal with want to work or are available to work, and perhaps impacts on practices as well that you deal with? Is there any particular pattern or anything that stands out that you've seen?
I think we're probably seeing similar things to what you're seeing. Is that obviously when the pandemic first hit, I think was possibly the hardest for practices who weren't prepared, didn't quite know how it was going to pan out, and found that patients were staying away basically. So some of them dealt better than others in terms of that pivot to more of a sort of telehealth type style service. For others, that wasn't a simple thing to do. I think there's also been a lot of stress, concern, and burnout associated with that. Across the board. That's not just in states that are hit hardest. I think that's across the board. And yes, hearing a lot of stories about how hard it is to actually find good people to join their practice.
And so we'll move on to, that leads us nicely to the next part, which is around recruitment. So if it is hard to recruit, and many have reported that, but some are succeeding. Many are succeeding, we've seen in this time. And certainly, we've had, again, members in Project X who some have recruited 5, 6 or 7 doctors in the last 18 months. From your perspective, what helps us stand out in this sort of drought? How can a practice separate itself and make itself more attractive to potential recruits?
I think a practice has got to be prepared to be flexible in terms of what they offer and how they structure the contractual arrangements. So flexibility in terms of hours of work, for instance, I think is key, so that you don't necessarily only look for full-timers, will only accept somebody that works on a Saturday morning as well as doing their 9 to 5, that you'll actually think a bit more creatively about how you might fill your roster. I think a lot of GPs these days are looking for a bit more flexibility so they can actually achieve more of a work-life balance. So yes, you may need to look at that. Practices, I think, who have a really strong supportive culture and a strong supportive team-based approach are more attractive. I think GPs want to go somewhere where they feel part of a team and they feel supported and listened to. So I think that's one thing that also stands out. If you're able to allow a GP to follow any special interest areas, again, that's key. And I think safety and security, particularly in this climate, are also very important. So that would be about how do you ensure that you're able to get a new GP in your practice up and running very quickly, give them that security of knowing that they've got patient flow coming in, that you're going to support them and help them grow such that they're busy, that they're not necessarily going to be left to their own devices, that they've got a strong sort of marketing push to basically help them be as successful as possible. I think that's key too, because you really want to give somebody that sense of security about making a leap from one practice to another.
Thank you. So we've got flexibility, culture, safety and security and certainty of the flow, and then potentially a niche or specialist interest, yes, allowing them to develop that. Have you noticed if billing type, bulk billing versus mixed billing or private billing has any influence in terms of attraction?
Yes, but I don't necessarily know if the perception is reality. So I think there is a perception around bulk billing versus mixed or private, and less. It seems less of an attractive prospect on the bulk billing side as opposed to mixed or private. I don't necessarily know that that's linked to your ability to earn, or even sense of fulfillment. I think there's sometimes a perception that bulk billing is more of that sort of conveyor belt, factory line sort of approach to general practice, and it's not always the case at all. So I think, yes, there is some of that around. Yeah.
So perhaps that's something that a practice that is bulk billing might want to address in the brief they give, and maybe some of their materials and collateral to address that early.
Absolutely.
All right. So sometimes this is a curly one, and this is unprepared, so I'll ask for forgiveness after. I get the odd message, and I got it, and that the person who sent it to me may actually be listening to this, which is it was bordering on abusive. It was why are you inviting people like these recruiters, people like Claire, to talk to us in general practice? Why are you even giving them an audience? They're not very nice. They just take money for doing nothing, and why do you bother? Like, I'm really, you're supposed to advocate for general practice. Why are you inviting them? It's pretty a ranty message I got, and my answer was pretty simple, right? We're for private general practice, and part of private general practice is you need a good, healthy number of clinicians in your clinic that are right for you, right for the patients you serve. And as part of that, you need to recruit. And one piece of the recruitment puzzle comes from working with the right recruiters. So I think that's really important, the right recruiters, because there are some people who, are a little bit unscrupulous. And I think we all recognize that. But with the right people, I think there are good business partnerships to be made. And, I've done the numbers. So over the years, probably spent between 500,000 and 600,000. I think it was 572 with recruiters. And there's in those businesses that I've recruited into, whether I've exited those or not, there's probably residual billings of 8-9 million a year coming from the doctors that have stayed from that initial investment. So it's a no-brainer for me. But I'd love to hear you and give you a platform to defend yourself, because I think there's a common misconception and thinking like that, which means that people won't even consider speaking to an agent. So I'd love to just hear from your perspective, why you're not those things.
And it is tricky sometimes differentiating yourself, because you're in a marketplace where that there are that sort of relatively small element of unscrupulous recruiters, or recruiters who simply don't have any depth of expertise around what they do. So I think in terms of answering that question about why use a recruiter, I'd say that recruitment, if it's done well, is a real skill, and recruiters who recruit all the time become experts in what they do. Within your practice, most practices, I would say, would probably not have anyone they would consider to be an expert in recruitment, because to be an expert, you need to do a lot of it, and you need to learn along the way. Most practices might be hiring possibly a couple of people a year. So you don't get to develop that expertise. And so as recruiters, that's what we do all of the time. So whoever you're dealing with is an expert in what they do. That would be the first thing. And I think that's what we tend to want in our lives generally, isn't it? We look to experts to help us with things that we're not experts in ourselves. We'll go to an accountant because we're not experts in managing our finances and accounting and tax returns and that kind of thing. So it's a similar argument in terms of recruitment. It's about dealing with experts in what they do. The other thing is that I think most practices would feel like their best approach is probably to their networks. And a lot of the time that is the case. And if practices are successful quickly, it might be because they've got a great network, they reach out to somebody, and hey presto, the deal is done. That's great. But I think for a lot of people, those networks are quite small and quite restricted. And the benefit of a recruitment agent is that their networks are vast. They're national, they're vast, they contain GPs of all shapes and sizes, all interests, and the chances therefore of that recruiter being able to find you as practice owner the type of person that you're looking for, exactly the type of person you're looking for that will fit with your practice, is much higher than it would be if all you're doing is really just going to a relatively small network of your own. So I think that would be the other thing, is that you know, the networks are vast. So we have much more chance of finding that right fit. The other thing that we can do, and I think this is something that I may have touched on in one of the conferences that you held recently, is recruiters are able to reach out and target particular individuals that you might be interested in. And it's something that you may feel very uncomfortable doing yourself. And it puts that sort of almost a sort of broker style approach to actually targeting people, great people that you feel you want to join your practice, without necessarily exposing you and putting you in a difficult situation. So that's another service that I think you know, is really invaluable when it comes to engaging with recruiters.
Thank you. I'm going to add one thing, which is, you know, people say all of these excuses about, you know, recruiters are like this or this or that or the other. There's a group of people who don't want to pay for anything, but they want the world to pay them. So, you know, we want private billing patients or mixed billing patients who pay a private fee to us, but behind the scenes, we're looking for the cheapest, shortest cut, you know, copy and paste legal documents. I don't want to pay the recruiter. I don't want to pay people. And the two things don't fit together. And I think it's really important to have integrity about, you know, so all the things line up. If we want people, if we're experts and we want, you know, in general practice, which we are, specialists in general practice, and we want people to pay us, then we've got to be willing, on the flip side, to get the right experts around us and be willing to make those investments as well. Because if that isn't congruent, then there's just a piece around it which lacks integrity. I think it's just really important to just call that out. I've no bones about that. I'm quite happy to say that. That's just been my experience, that people don't want to pay and then they rationalize with all these types of excuses. Whereas if you really, all we want is to find the right fit doctor, the right fit GP, and we want to have the best chance of doing that. And part of that will be our own activity, and part will be working with others who can help.
And I think it's also about viewing that payment in a different way. It's about it's the value that's then associated with that payment and the return on investment that you then get. And certainly, having been in business for 20 years, I wouldn't sleep at night if I felt that all of our clients didn't feel value in terms of the fees that they're paying to us. It just, it wouldn't be a business worth being in or running if I felt that was the perception out there.
Absolutely. I might move over across to Todd now. He's got his hand up and he's eager to add his wisdom. So I'll hand over to you, Todd.
I think one of my philosophies in business is that marketplaces are pretty efficient. You know, it doesn't make sense that you could offer a product or a service for a sustained period of time that doesn't provide a return. So rather than people saying that's a ripoff or that's too much, it would be much better to say, I wonder how people get value from that. So let's just talk about what you talked about there, Claire, pick that up. So let's pretend we pay around about $20,000 to a recruiter. Let's not worry about exact math, but let's just say it's around about 20 grand. And for the purposes of the calculation, it'll be 20 grand. And that person works for the clinic for a year. and they bill $300,000. Now, that's a pretty low amount of billings for a full-time GP or any GP. So let's pretend they're doing that, and let's pretend it's a really low retention by the practice at 30%. So you're still going to get $90,000 at the end of the year, and so you've had a 4.5 times return on your investment at a service fee level. And that person, if you look after them, you've got the right culture, they stick around for a long time. So the return on that recruiting spend can be really quite high. And furthermore, if you think about what time and attention are you spending on that, you could reallocate that somewhere else. I'm going to actually get to a question in a moment, but I just want to get people to change their thinking. Recruiting doesn't matter if it's employees or doctors, it's actually a funnel. So your job is to make the top of the funnel as broad as it can be. So you might run your own campaigns, but you probably want to partner up with a few recruiting agencies as well that align values. And then one of the things I used to really enjoy doing was giving them a brief. And I want to hear from you about how a clinic could get the most out of a recruiting agency. So think about your top 5, 10 clinics that you work with. What do they do that's different that puts them front of mind for you when you've got a whole bunch of GPs that are looking for a home to go to? What makes it appealing? How would you like to work with practice owners?
They're very clear about what they want and who they want. They're very clear about the profile of the person that fits with them. So that makes the recruiter's job a lot easier because they can be quite specific in terms of the type of person, the type of skill set that they're looking for. They're also generally very responsive. So they will respond quickly to any resumes or profiles that are put in front of them. They will give you very honest feedback about whether or not they want to take things to the next stage, and if they don't, why not? There could be something specific about the resume. So it's very much a sort of partnership approach where there's ongoing communication throughout the whole process. The other thing that they do, the practices that we work a lot with tend to, sorry, I didn't turn my phone off. They tend to treat every candidate with a lot of respect in terms of the time that they will give them for the interview, the opportunity they will give that person to ask questions and find out more about the practice, because it is very much a two-way process. The prospective GP needs to understand more about the practice to know whether or not they want to join, as well as the practice needing to find out more about that potential GP. And then one major thing, which is always a real bugbear for any recruitment agent, is that if you get to the point where the practice says, yes, I want that GP, the GP says, yes, I want that practice, but then the process of putting a contract together, getting it all signed, takes forever. It just kills any goodwill that's been built up throughout that process. So I'd say to all practices is you just need to be ready for that point at which you've done all the hard work. You've got to the point where you've done your interviews, you've done your checking, you've got a doctor that you really want to take on board. You need to be ready to go right then. You need to be putting something in front of them that tells that GP, we really want you. Here's the contract. Here's all the detail as to what it's going to look like when you join us. Otherwise, you'll lose them.
I like that. I heard a few themes there. I think this is really important for people listening to pull these out. The first is the clarity about who you want. And I think by what you were saying there, Claire, it's both ways. So clarity also on the offer that they're receiving. So there's sort of no doubt about what the arrangements are, financial, etc. So clarity is a really important piece up front. The second theme was responsiveness, just making decisions and giving feedback so that both parties know exactly what they're expecting. That's really important. And respect was a really important part of this. So respect to me means things like time and listening. Is there something else that's in respect?
No, I think it's just about it is the time. Yes, it's giving somebody the time. and I suppose it's the way that you're communicating within that interview process as well, that shows that sort of transparency, honesty, respect, and also I think, you know, the respect would come in terms of the way perhaps that you're making your decision and you have to let somebody down, you know, and that's obviously something that your recruiter can help you with, but you know, you're actually being very honest with your you know, communication all the way through.
And I think one thing that you didn't say, but respect is important from all parties. Sometimes people can be a bit frustrated that they have to part with money for something. And when somebody makes it look easy, one of the challenges can be that you feel that it is easy. But of course, like all jobs, you're just seeing the tip of the iceberg, right? You don't see all of the work that's done. So universal respect, and just remembering the way you deal with your intermediaries, your recruiter, will probably permeate through to that applicant as well.
Yes, absolutely.
And the last thing you talked about was really important, is momentum. You know, if you're it's like dating, right? And when you're dating somebody, you've got to at some point follow through on the commitment, and you've got to make sure that all happens pretty smoothly. And just remember, you're not the only person that's chasing this person. You know, most likely they are looking at other opportunities. And so I think that the most useful thing that people can take out from this is, you know, at the end of the day, only both parties can benefit from the same outcome. So the recruiter only gets paid when they recruit, and that's the goal of the practice. And working in unison with a small number of recruiters, I think just choose them well. In terms of practice owners, they should choose them well. And some people might be listening and they're not owners at all, and in fact they're GPs, and they may actually be looking from the other side of the spectrum. And again, it's really important that they work with people that have been around for a long time. This is an area where you get cowboys that pop up from time to time and see it as kind of an easy way to make a return. I'm going to get you to just close out with a few words as to if you were on the other side and you were choosing an agency to help you recruit, what would you look to recruit them by? What principles?
I'd look to understand their level and depth of expertise in the sector. And I think I'd be looking specifically for general practice experience, because recruiting within the hospital system is very different to recruiting within the general practice space. I'd be looking for you know, a proven track record such that a recruitment agent is and can very easily supply you with examples of work that they've done before. Testimonials, is very happy to give you the name of another practice owner that would like to talk to you and is happy to talk to you about their experience. You know, I think that's key. If you're good at what you do, then you have a lot of people that you've worked with before that are very happy with what you've done and are happy to talk about that. So I think that's one thing. One thing you mentioned also, Todd, was you know, you'd advise practices to perhaps pick one or two recruiters, and I certainly agree with that. I think there's a temptation to think that if you go out to 10, 15, 20, you've got more chance of being successful. That's actually not the case at all, because those 15, 10, 20 will know that they're not necessarily you know, working on a exclusive role. There'll be very little effort put into finding you that person, whereas if you're just working with one or two, you'll get a much better result overall, and be able to manage the process much better as well.
Yeah, I think that's correct in that you've got a certain amount of time you're going to allocate to this, and let's just pretend it's an hour or 2 hours a week that you're going to allocate to your recruiting. It makes sense that you do that with 2, maybe 3, not 10, because then the amount of time is tokenistic, and you should expect that the reciprocal also applies. You know, they're not going to commit the same to you. So this has been really useful, and I think you could plausibly, so this is really interesting. I think sometimes turning thinking on its head, one way of thinking would be, imagine if you did no advertising or recruiting for GPs as an owner, and you just said, I'm going to work with a couple of agencies and I'm going to get them to do all of the work on this. How successful you could be just applying that particular approach would be of huge benefit as well. So whereas there's a bunch of people who think, I'm just going to do it all myself, they're the DIYers, spend a lot of time on it and often don't get great outcomes, and they're often still looking for doctors. You could plausibly create the alternative where you've got a virtual army of people looking for your doctors and also a big cohort of people that are interested in looking for work. If I was going to choose one of those two strategies, I would definitely go with the one where I'm using the recruiter only and forgetting the recruitment based on the work I've seen. Just as we finish up, Claire, is there anything you'd like to say just as we bring this episode to a close?
No, I think just following on from your comment, Todd, yes, I think it is about recognising where your expertise lies and where your time is best spent. And if there is a way to outsource something and get the best result and the quickest result, then it's something that I think most business owners, whether they're in general practice or elsewhere, would choose to do. So absolutely, I think it's very, very well worth considering how a recruitment agent can help you grow your practice and achieve outcomes more quickly.
Fabulous. On that note, it's worth reminding people that our name is Scale My Clinic, and so there's no doubt that Sachin and I are deeply invested in scalable solutions. Exactly right. Just simplify, stick to the stuff that you're really good at, and let other people do what they're really good at. It's been really awesome talking to you today, Claire. 20 years in any sector is, a really massive commitment, and you're not done yet by any measure. So thank you, and we look forward to hearing more about what you've been up to in another episode in future.
Great.
Bye.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Sachin.
Thanks for tuning into the Scale My Clinic podcast with Todd and Sachin and the team. For more information and to get the resources mentioned in this podcast, visit www.scalemyclinic.com.